Two, three, four. Welcome to Off Panel from Sketch.com. This week's guest is a musician, comic fan, and the king of partying. It's Andrew WK. Thanks for coming on the show, Andrew.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for including me.
Oh, so, as I said before the show, big fan. But, I want to talk to you because I love your Twitter presence. You're really fantastic at, being a very positive presence on something that can quite often be pretty negative. And on there, you share regular party tips. And one of your recent party tips was for people to read more comic books. And as a person who runs a comic book site and somebody who's a fan, that was huge for me. I just thought that was awesome. And I know you like comics in general, but for you, what makes comic books your kind of party?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about my efforts on the computer. And I really appreciate your support there. And I'm really happy that you relate specifically to that party tip. Because, for example, some people would say that doesn't count as partying, that comic books in their mind don't count as a party, and that sometimes people say, how is that a party tip? If I went to a party and everyone was reading comic books, it would be a boring party. Well, of course I would disagree with that, but the point is, thank you for embracing this very wide definition of what partying is, because to me, and I would want to clarify that for the listener here, for me, partying is doing what you feel you were meant to do, doing what you enjoy, that is transcends pleasure almost in a way. It connects with you in a way that is so fundamental that it almost feels bound up in your very identity, your very reason for existence. And for many people, and me included, this certain feeling that comic books and the I would even say just cartooning, illustration, drawing, comic strips as well, that very early on touched a type of undeniable excitement within me, and encouraged that excitement when I found it elsewhere, whether it was in music or in performing or anything else I did. There was something that I could just tell when I read comics, it made me feel better about being alive. And you don't take that stuff lightly when you're young, and it becomes even more precious as you get older.
Yeah. No, and that's something that when I was younger, one of the things I always say about comic books is when I was younger, I would read them and I'd have this moment of euphoria where I'd get to this big moment and I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And, when I read comics today, one of my favorite moments is when I feel that again. And another thing that I think is interesting about comic books is, like you were talking about how, some people might look at a party and if they walk in and everybody's reading comics, it'd be kind of a weird thing. But when you find somebody else that likes the same, pretty much likes the same anything as you, but likes the same comics as you, you have this bond that is just incredible, because you can just riff on and on about it, because it's this shared interest that, you may not find with every person.
That's very, very good point. And in keeping with that, it would be hard to communicate to someone who doesn't necessarily understand or feel that way, maybe about comics in general. It would be very hard to get through to that person, and that's not bad necessarily.
Right.
It reminds me of music. In certain songs, there are certain moments in certain songs that are very difficult to describe to someone who hasn't heard the song.
Yeah.
And even if they have heard the song, if they don't specifically connect with that moment, and it's not necessarily a lyrical moment, it's not like a guitar solo, there might just be some chord change or just a dynamic shift in the song that just has this certain feeling. And it would be very hard to explain why you liked that. You just either do or you don't. And those moments in life in general are very, very special, because not only does it make you feel like you're not alone in this thing, but it makes you feel as though it's not a fluke. It wasn't something that, happened to appeal to you. There must be something. It's like a glimpse of truth. There's got to be something that you can actually count on in that moment. And when someone else feels it, it really confirms that.
hmm No, I mean, I totally know what you're saying. And like one of the biggest things, like I'm a huge live music fan. And that's one of the reasons why I really love concerts is because when you have that moment and you're with a big audience of people who are sharing that, like, that communal experience of sharing this moment. Like I remember one time I was at a Flaming Lips concert, and I looked around me when there was like Do You Realize was playing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the song, but I looked around and like you could just tell that everyone was having this experience that was just incredible. And and that was one thing I was going to talk to you about is I saw you had shared a picture that somebody had taken with you at Northeast Comic Con a few weekends back, and you're out on the floor, and I know you're playing a show out there. But I think one of the interesting things about Comic Cons, and I talked to this guy who works for one of the big con organizers in the world about it, is it's very similar to a concert in a lot of ways. It's like everyone is there sharing this experience, and there's just this boundless enthusiasm to it. And I'm curious, like, what's your take on the con experience? Is that something that you really feel personally?
Well, first of all, thank you for being aware of my recent convention experiences. Being, I guess, a performer and not a comic book artist or a writer, or even really a collector at the level that many other convention goers are there in. I'm not there in a sort of a comics capacity. It's been really exciting for me, really honor, really, to be able to participate in some official situation at these conventions, because there's so many people there that have very legitimate comic book connections, and mine are more tenuous. Mine are more. See, I'm not even that at that level of fandom where I would ever hold myself up to the same levels as many other fans. I'm almost just a lover of the fandom. I like the whole thing.
Yeah.
I like not even understanding parts of it. I like being completely sort of in awe of other people's dedication to it. Like the whole atmosphere I enjoy. And again, getting just to be there, let alone participating in it directly, means a great deal to me. I think, like you're saying, the kind of enthusiasm, it doesn't almost really matter. It reminds me of the best things that I like about sporting events. It reminds me of the best things that I liked about school. It's sort of all the best things about humanity.
Yeah.
It brings out the best in people, and who wouldn't want to be around people when they're in that mood?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what one of the cool things about these conventions is, like, you're surrounded. Like I typically go there, and for me, to a certain degree, it's work, but I walk around cons. I always make sure that I have a day where I just spend the day walking around the con and just enjoying the floor. And I just love seeing the people who, like, every single person there is loving something, and that's so cool. I just think it's totally rad.
Yeah, it would be. I imagine it would be a completely beneficial turn of events in modern civilizations in general if everyone almost was required to have some fandom, some part of their lives that was focused on that. And to a large degree, probably everyone is, even if they're a fan of their own survival, if they're a fan of their family, if they're a fan of food and shelter. There's basic things that bring out those elements, but it's almost the type of non fundamental aspects where we get to shine a bit more. That's what arts and culture have, this strange paradox, because of course you could say that music and art, you can live without it. You can get through the day as long as you have food, shelter, and water, and maybe after that, sort of friends and family. That those are the absolute necessities. But it's the beauty of these things not being necessities, that and then in that way they kind of become necessities, because without them, what is the point of striving to survive? We're not surviving just to be able to survive longer. We're surviving so we can enjoy the benefits of having survived. You know what I mean? So they do become primal. They do become requirements. And if you see someone who doesn't have something that joyous in their life, you do get the sense that they're missing out on what all the other hard work is for.
Right. No, I completely agree with that. I mean, I've Yeah, everyone, I'm in the workforce, and I know quite often my parents, for example, want me to like save my money, and I have no problem with saving money, but it's like I don't work so I can like, gather money. I work so I can have life experiences. And like, a few years back, I actually I quit my job and traveled around the world for half a year, and I wouldn't trade anything for that experience because it was so spectacular and it was just such a life enriching experience. And I don't know, I mean, that's a complete aside, but I do think that it's important for people to embrace their passions. And I think, the fact that you get to go to cons like the Northeast Comic Con, and I know you've been to San Diego a few times, I think it's great that you get to experience that, because I really think it's like one of the best, shows of humanity in a lot of ways.
It is, and it blew my mind the first time I went to a convention, which was many, many years ago. It was a very small regional convention, comic book convention in Michigan, I think in Lansing, where I don't really know if there was any events. It might have just been vendors, just comic books. But what I really noticed is that everybody was nice. And I don't know if there's really, that many situations where everybody is being nice. It's different than at a sporting event because there's a competition element there, with different teams competing and with different factions competing. It's different than even certain sort of holiday events like New Year's Eve, where you might go because there's a kind of anxiety that can come with those types of gatherings, attention, maybe even a good kind of tension, like counting down to the ball drop, but a kind of pressure, almost like 4th of July with the fireworks. There's something, of course, really great, and it brings people together, but there's this sense of fleetingness, like this is a holiday, we're celebrating it once, oh look, now all that build up and now it's over. When you have these moments of connection around a shared interest, it feels perpetual. It doesn't feel like something that is fleeting. It feels like something that is always there and you're acknowledging it. And I would challenge anybody to go to a convention, and, they might not like it, but I would challenge them to go and not be moved by the atmosphere of kindness, because there's no reason for anyone not to be kind.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so I want to ask you about comics in specific, and I know with touring and your many other interests, it can be difficult to keep up with comics. I mean, I run a comic book site, and honestly, it's pretty difficult for me to keep up with them because there's so many these days. But, what is it that you like about comics? What is it about the art form that speaks to you? And what are some comics that you kind of grew up loving?
Well, I haven't ever really kept up with them after my initial efforts of trying to keep up with comics, probably around age 13 or 14. I'd been very into them casually, meaning anytime I got a comic book, I would be excited. I would look through it. I then realized that you could collect them. You could seek them out. It wasn't just sort of like stumbling across a toy that you then played with. You could actually amass a variety of these items with some type of sort of organizing involved and decision-making involved and all that. And I tried very, very hard, for example, to get into superhero comics, but I couldn't understand it. It was just way, way too complicated for me. Not that I think many other children my age understood them very well and had the capacity, but I didn't, for whatever reason, didn't have the mental capacity to process that depth of characters. I also wasn't necessarily very interested in at that time in the type of mythology, the type of fundamental storytelling. It didn't connect me with that part of my humanity. I didn't really understand. I thought it was kind of boring, just the same way I thought also that fairy tales and Mother Goose and stuff was boring, or fables in general, allegories. I didn't see how I couldn't relate to it. I couldn't relate to Spider-Man directly. I tried to, though, and that was what I took away from those earlier years was I really wanted to be part of it, even if I didn't understand it. And that was kind of baffling to me. It's like, there's something so appealing about this, just the way it looked, the way it smelled, the sensory experience of the entire comic book world, going to the store, being around other people who seemed to know all this stuff about it, listening to these adults that could talk to each other about these storylines. I just wanted to be immersed in it, whether I even understood it or not, which to me was very telling in terms of its power. that even if I didn't get it, I still was getting something from it. And then I discovered adult comic books, or underground comics, essentially comics that had nothing to do with, I guess, superheroes at all. And if they did, maybe they were sort of almost mocking that tradition in comics. And that's when I really was able to feel like I had sort of hit upon something that I could directly relate to in my life. They were very disturbing. They were very dark. If they were funny in a way that was really nonsensical. I think, of course, Mad Magazine was probably the first time I had realized that there was this whole other world out there of artists and comic books. And then, these weren't necessarily based on sex or so much that type of the adult world, but I guess also I really liked EC comics, entertainment comics, Tales from the Crypt,
Mm-hmm.
Haunt of Fear, the Weird Science, and that whole genre. Now those were all reprints, but I really liked those artists. I really liked the way each one was a short story within itself. It didn't require really knowing anything. You could just start any of those issues at any point and get something out of it. But I collected and had subscriptions through most of my teenage years to everything from Donald Duck, like the Gladstone reviews, to Mad Magazine and EC. And I tried X-Force. But as you were even saying, I mean, there was at that point in the early 90s, when comic books were sort of having this I don't want to say second wave, maybe third wave explosion of popularity, it just became too many. There was like 7 different Spider-Man titles, I remember. I said, I'm just going to focus on Spider-Man. And then there was the Amazing Spider-Man, there was Spectacular Spider-Man. Then they came out with just Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And there was this excitement about, you got to get the first issue. And then there'd be like 7 different editions of the first issue. And I started just feeling kind of, again, just completely overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
But it never stopped I realized what I got out of it didn't have anything to do with anything. It transcended the comics themselves. Just like you could love going into the forest and have no idea about what type of tree that is, or even what type of bird that is, or have any real understanding of the natural phenomenon that are bringing about this forest. You just love hanging out in the woods.
Right.
That's how I've basically felt about comics now. And I say that primarily out of respect for so many people that I've met, friends of mine, and just the fandom community in general, who know everything.
Right.
I'm proud to say I know very little, yet I still can participate in it. And that's why I really encourage other people to not be intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Because you're not meant to be scared off from it. And anyone who would try to belittle someone is not a real fan.
Right. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do. Is actually my dream is to open my own comic shop, because I just love the idea of being able to spend my days helping people find something that they'll love. Because I once upon a time needed that person in my life, where I would go to a comic shop and I'd ask somebody that worked there, and they would give me advice based off of what I already liked and everything. And it was, I've had people like literally change the progression of my life based off of, like, I don't know, just answering a question. And I would love to pay that forward, because I think it's great. I really love giving advice to people on comics because of all the things you said. It can be overwhelming, and like there really is something out there for anybody in comics, and it's just really cool being able to do that. But I know some fans are not entirely like that.
And that's okay, because there are enough people that are like you. And I think if those fans that felt slightly uncharitable or even resentful about other people getting involved that didn't necessarily hold up to that same high level of knowledge, they themselves, if they were very honest, would remember the time when they had no idea about anything either.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were probably the benefactors of someone taking them under their wing to a degree, or like you're saying, some maven who could really be like a librarian and just introduce aspects of this understandably overwhelming world. It's meant to be overwhelming. That's part of the excitement of it. There is too much there for anyone to really process. So no one can really read every single comic book in existence, or maybe someone has.
God, they'd have to dedicate their whole life to it. It'd be intense.
Many lifetimes.
Many lifetimes. Well, I know you're busy, so I have one more question for you. I could probably go on for days, but so you're coming up to Alaska this weekend, my home, and it'll be the first time I've seen you live since you played at Club Soda in Spokane 13 years ago. That's a lot of shows between now and then. And one of the things I always wonder about, I told you earlier that I'm a big fan of live music, but what is it about performing live that still gets you as amped as when you first started? Like back in the day when I saw you at Club Soda, even though you'd been performing well before then.
Wow. Well, first of all, it doesn't feel like very long ago to me. Maybe because it's been such a consistent activity. I mean, it's been like one moment, one roller coaster ride. And of course that ride has ups and downs and twists and turns, but it's all been one ride. I don't know. I mean, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm doing the same thing, and by choice. I'm on the same mission. So it seems like one long now. Like I how days get broken up when you go to sleep. And you start to get this sense of distance based on the seasons passing and things. But with this, it doesn't feel like I've gone to bed at all. It's like one long staying up late past your bedtime forever. I mean, trying to do better is the main motivator. Just working towards that moment, wherever it brings me. If it's on stage, trying to say like that was the closest I've gotten to a perfect stage moment or performance, or if it's even doing this, that was one of the better interviews, or maybe that was one of the better podcasts, just trying to improve and get better at reaching towards that feeling. I mean, I think that feeling we talked about right at the beginning of our conversation, this kind of transcendent, euphoric excitement and joy that tells you that it's good to be alive. That's what I'm working towards and trying to get to myself, but also to get to for anyone who's participating in this with me, who's whether they're an audience member or whatever they want to consider themselves. I think we're doing this together. I think that's the main thing that we're all fans of, is this joy, and we're trying side by side to achieve that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think you do, and I think that's. I don't know. Like I said, it's been a while since I've seen you live, but one of the things that really stood out about that show was the fact that I remember walking out like side by side. It was a small venue. It was like 200, 300 people or something like that. And, everyone's walking out and every single person is talking about how that was the most fun they've ever had at a concert. And, you go to a lot of concerts and you don't necessarily have that experience and have that communal energy to it. But like, I don't know. I have to applaud you. The fact that you bring so much energy and that you're so welcoming to the fans. Like, I still can't believe at the end of that show, half the audience must have been on stage with you, and you just ran with it. Like, it was incredible. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing your show on Saturday. And thank you so much for coming on my podcast and talking about comics and life and positivity.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for sticking not just with me, but sticking with this feeling for all these years, and here's to many, many, many more years. And here's to that feeling only getting stronger as we get older, not weakening, not diluting itself. I think we perpetually develop more abilities to feel more about life. So thank you for everything. And thanks for feeling that. I felt it with you here today.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Andrew WK, on his site at andrewwk.com, on Twitter at andrewwk, and on tour with his band on the regular. If you get the chance, see him live. His concerts are some of the most fun around. You can find more Sketch content at sketch.com. That's SKTCHD.com. Find us on Twitter at sketchcomic, and like us on Facebook at /sketched. If you enjoyed the show, give it a rating or review on iTunes. You'd be my best friend. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.